Good morning and welcome to this session as part of our seminar for Anticipate the Unknown. I'm going to speak to you about third-party risk, your responsibility but not in your control today. I am Peter Pernebo, the global head of S&P Global's TPRM practice. I'm based in New York, but I am Swedish by birth. I joined this organization from Goldman Sachs about 5 years ago, where I was working with their TPRM program, building out policies, procedures. So I have been a practitioner, and now I have an opportunity to be a solution provider to help our clients build effective third-party risk management programs. I have worked with clients over in Asia Pacific since 2018. And I am very excited to speak to you all here today. So everybody uses vendors, right? And that is a smart way to focus resources on what they do best. But when you use vendors, you do give up control. Today, I will dive into the challenges for vendor risk management, current trends. We're going to talk about how to establish an effective program, and some of the key success factors for tactical execution of your program. I will also talk about the two of the hardest topics today, the TPRM talent crunch, and how to optimize a program to focus on managing risk instead of doing busy work. There are six key challenges that you must address, in any efficient TPRM program. First, you need to understand your supplier. Do you have a golden source of vendor information across your entire organization with common data, a common methodology for risk evaluation, and transparent reporting? What about your infrastructure? Is your infrastructure efficient and allow you to find risk rather than just managing a process? You got to adhere to regulatory compliance. Do you understand the regulations in all of the countries and industries you operate in? And does your tools and processes in place facilitate regulatory reporting in those different jurisdictions? The extended enterprise. Do you partner with vendors who are providing critical outsourced service to get the best out of them? Cybersecurity and resiliency. Do you know your vendor security positions? Can they be hacked? Do they have strong, control of their environment? And finally, data control. Do you know what data your vendors have access to? Do you know how the local data regulations for where you operate? Data regulations are different in different countries. Malaysia versus Singapore versus New Zealand versus Japan, all different data control and data privacy records and regulation that you need to adhere to. So let's take a look at some of the strong trends that we see in the industry today. Maybe the strongest one is around digitization of data. Everybody's creating electronic vendor profiles, electronic versions of documents that can be understood and read across multiple jurisdictions, languages, and systems. Contracts are being digitized. Due diligence evidence, the electronic reporting with regulators, the conversations with your vendors and suppliers, all stored in one common place. Automation is, another very big trend today. To speed up and make your TPRM processes more efficient with codified business rules, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Flexibility to configure multiple scenarios, roles, workflows, and question sets in your platforms. You need to have regulators, that you support in your different environments. And those regulators, they are, encouraging the use of RegTech tools, and they are looking at different RegTech tools as a way to foster and improve processes across the entire industry. Basically, allowing different organizations that typically compete with each other, learn from each other, and taking the best practices across the industry. And finally, a move to outsourced TPRM. Talent is very hard to find, today in general, and in smaller locations, countries, and cities outside major centers, it's really hard. I'm going to speak a little bit more to the details of this talent crunch further on in my presentation. Third-party risk management has been a process that has evolved for some years now. In the early days, we had the formalization of a transparent corporate TPRM practice. Started about 2008. Before that, supplier risk was typically handled by multiple parties in the organization. Different divisions, had contracts for the same data with the same providers. And that resulted in a lack of transparency and varying levels of stringency and controls across an organization, both divisional and regional. Moving on to the basic level around 2015, that's where we started seeing establishment of single source of vendor information across the enterprise, allowing for transparency across, all parts of the organization. The advanced, vendor risk management that followed started introducing vendor lifecycle management, establishing clear roles and responsibilities, business users, with specific roles, due diligence partners, control centers. You establish your cybersecurity, data privacy roles, maybe a TPRM, vendor management office, as well as, reporting, through vendor risk management committees and the board. Best in class today is pretty much using this shared information that is now available across the organization, as well as standardized industry assessments to get a common view of your vendor's performance and their control gaps. Also allowing monitoring of risk with SLAs and KPIs to be able to report on the consistent delivery of services by your suppliers. And right now, we are seeing a move into what we refer to as optimization. That is where you start using professional outside organizations to conduct low-value and administrative tasks across the entire TPRM program, allowing you and your colleagues and employees to focus on the relationship with the vendors, as well as managing the real risks instead of a process. We are also seeing the emergence of ESG as one of the leading activities right now. ESG is going to play an important role, in many parts of like an enterprise, going forward, and TPRM being one of them. When you establish a TPRM program, it is important to have senior leadership engagement to establish policies that is fit to the organization. Senior management is ultimately responsible for the adherence to these policies. A reporting framework should be put in place that provides transparent, consistent, and immediate insight. TPRM or vendor risk, should be one of the risks that are reviewed and incorporated in an organization's overall risk position, as well as other risks such as operational risk, financial risk, and HR employee risks. Someone from senior management should be individually named as the accountable officer, for TPRM. This person should have decision power as well as a seat at enterprise operational and risk committees. A dedicated TPRM function should be established to build and run the day-to-day tactical program and to coordinate all stakeholders across the organization. There are many different risk domains to consider. Cybersecurity being one of the most prominent that most organizations have a fairly good handle on and are aware of the need to have a program and processes to address. But you also need to consider many other domains. I listed some of them on this slide here. Domains like finance, AML, sanctions, geopolitical, ESG that we talked about, data privacy, legal, subcontractors, and many more shown on this slide. An effective program has built-in codified rules that make risk-based decision based on the product or service provided by the vendor. The groundskeeper at your headquarters does not need the same due diligence as a drilling contractor in a third world country requires. Then the relevant risk domains are investigated at the relevant depths. The appropriate level is not always the same. For example, a vendor with direct access to your client database needs to go deeper than for a company that provides contingent workers for on-staff, on-premises staff augmentation. Any identified risks, should be recorded, reviewed, and approved or mitigated. Critical control gaps should be made visible to the senior management. This ties into what I discussed on the previous slide, that your senior management needs to have visibility, to the risk, that is posed by the vendors and the outsourcing of critical functions to outside organizations. Vendor oversight is not a one-time activity during onboarding. Relevant oversight, should be established based on risk, and due diligence should be refreshed periodically. The diagram to your right, is showing you the life cycle activities of vendor risk management. And it needs to be established as a program that you efficiently and constantly, execute, through your organization. Now I'm going to talk about some of the new hot areas: the talent crunch and program efficiency. So more regulations and more domains are being introduced, into our programs. We didn't really talk about ESG, modern slavery 5 years ago. We talked a lot about data security, and we talked a lot about cybersecurity, but these new domains are being added as the TPRM practice grows, which really results in you needing more staff, to be able to do an adequate job to control these domains. Other industries are getting regulated as well outside the financial services that has been leading the charge, for TPRM. A lot of supply chain companies are being regulated. Healthcare is being regulated. Insurance are being regulated. And they will start pulling on the same resources, making it expensive to hire qualified staff and close to impossible to get qualified staff outside major cities. This leads to an increased cost of retaining good staff. Challenges to provide a meaningful career track. Where does these good, TPRM professionals go after they have done TPRM in your organization? Opportunities with service providers becomes increasingly attractive for your staff, which really leaves you with the question, are you going to be left with the least qualified staff in your organization? And what impact does that have on innovation driving your organization? So some of the challenges of building a program that is effective is really to take a look in how these complex in-house programs have grown over the years by adding, making updates difficult to systems, to processes, and changes are also meeting resistance within the organization. Old technology, back office technology, a good enough mentality is often leading to success, through heroics. What I mean with that is people working long hours to put together that report, that was needed for the board meeting, and they got it done, and that was great. But it's not seamless, and it's not done in an automated way. This results in a focus on operations and managing the operation rather than focus on risk and innovation in your organization. So optimization is really the key here. So how do you optimize? Well, focus on your core competency as an organization. Avoid giving TPRM as an opportunity. Using specialists allows you to scale, to meet surges in demand for TPRM activities. You should operate with a risk-based approach. Use dynamic processes that recognize the actual risk and focus your resources on critical suppliers. Low-risk supplier management can be outsourced. Modern technology will drive efficiencies. Organizations that specializes on TPRM and different parts of the due diligence will be invested in continuously improving the technology and the solutions that they are providing. So let's take a look at this process and the different activities that build up a TPRM program. We are all very familiar, with the end-to-end vendor risk management lifecycle depicted on the wheel in the middle here. Vendor must be onboarded, oversight must be applied, and we need to have structured offboarding for vendors to be in place. We typically look at activities that support this process as splitting them up into high and low value activities, mainly based on the risk that the supplier brings to the organization. High value activities typically support your critical and high risk vendors. Those are normally numbering about 20 to 30% of any organization's vendor population. Low value activities, are those activities that support processes around medium and low risk vendors. And that is the majority of the vendors and as well as in the activities, 70 to 80% of an organization's vendors. But that also include a number of administrative activities for high and critical vendors. So let's take a look at, a closer look at the low risk category. What do we find there? We find activities like, supplier onboarding, data collection, registration, managing workflows, approvals, chasing responses in your organization, making sure internal approvals and reports are in place, tracking of control gaps, remediations, low-risk vendor remediation, and overall monitoring of vendors during the life cycle, as well as developing and conducting training to professionals within your organization. All time-consuming activities that are administrative in nature, less rewarding for your in-house professionals that are trying to build a career within your teams. This category of activities is well suited for outsourcing, removing tedious and frustrating tasks from your employees to organizations that have TPRM process experts on staff. This also shifts the burden from hiring and retaining those skills in-house to the provider. Finding, training, and retaining staff in this category is time-consuming and a costly activity that your senior TPRM staff could better use for high-value activities. On the high-value side, we find two categories of activities. The first includes the life cycle management of critical high suppliers, deep risk domain expertise to conduct due diligence to identify control gaps, risk classification, and relevant mitigation. In this category, you also find the continuous improvement of your TPRM framework. addition of new industry best practices, new regulations, something that should be an institutionalized activity. This category of activities can also be outsourced to external providers. There are many organizations in the marketplace providing deep domain analytical skills and TPRM program support that are focused on TPRM. The final category of high-value activities are those that must stay in-house, with direct ownership by your TPRM staff. These are also the more rewarding activities for professionals to engage in, managing actual risk rather than a cumbersome, tedious process. Activities in this category includes the establishment of the risk framework, execution of contracts, setting risk appetite thresholds and reviewing identified risks for acceptance or other actions leading to final approval of supplier engagement. That all requires a strong understanding of your company's culture and risk appetite, a constant dialogue with business owners, divisional and regional leadership, as well as board-level vendor risk committees for critical risks and outsourcing engagements. So, what does this mean in terms of opportunities for your organization? In the last year or so, we have seen a distinct move towards managed TPRM services in the financial services industry. In other industries that are less mature, the trend is even stronger. Why build a costly program when there are best practices available to adopt that also helps me mature existing programs, and does that on an ongoing basis? We believe that an organization can outsource as much as 80% of a TPRM program, and at the same time achieve a stronger program built on best practices that will evolve dynamically through your outsourcing partner. This also provides a huge relief to the talent challenge, moving the responsibility to an organization where TPRM is their main business, not a cost center, and at the same time providing meaningful and rewarding opportunities for your TPRM staff, focus on actual risk management rather than process management. So thank you for your time today. I would like to open up for questions, and I will be joined by my colleague Charles Bassner, who leads our commercial solutions practice. And Charles joined my team from Morgan Stanley, where he was responsible for third-party risk at their private wealth division. Comes with a wealth of experience and time in managing TPRM process. So we're going to take some questions. So, I mean, for those of you who have submitted questions, I will respond to some of them first, and you can submit questions, I mean, through the tool. So please feel free to do that at this point. We have 4 questions that have already been submitted here, and I'm going to go through them at this point. First question is, do you have any advice on how to get buy-in for TPRM from your senior management? So that's a great question. I think, when you get that, buy-in from your senior management, you really need to build up a business case around the cost of not doing TPRM. This is something organizations that are embarking on this journey really have to take a look at. It will be helpful for you to go out and look at examples. There have been data breaches that have been very prevalent. There were like a health, data breach, over in Singapore in 2018. There have been a lot of data breaches where, credit card information has been compromised from different organizations. So what is the cost of not doing strong TPRM? Add to that, anti-bribery, modern slavery, and the environmental impact, in today's, organization. And if you are a product corporation, that is moving products from places A to B to C. I mean, what are the geopolitical risks, you need to take, to move those products, through certain countries and jurisdiction. And you need to know, if your products are going to be hijacked or damaged, through storms or political events. So I think, that is the discussion we had when I was over at my previous employer of why we need to do TPRM. Really a discussion around what are the costs of not having a strong third-party risk management program in place. Second question that came in here talks about ESG. In terms of ESG, how is this being used practically in vendor risk? Well, so that's another excellent question. And I think, ESG is an emerging area. We all talk about that quite a bit. S&P Global has an entire team called Sustainable One focused on ESG. But specifically for third-party risk, there are a couple of, areas you really want to look into. You have human rights, modern slavery that we talked about. Germany, for example, very recently introduced very stringent, supply chain laws. The UK are tying up the client, for the entire supply chain in terms of modern slavery. Most countries, has strong environmental guidance that has been in place for decades. You can't just build a plant, and put like a power source, anywhere in the environment. The environmental protection agencies that really are a part of ESG. And then, of course, now in the more evolved area of ESG, we start looking at the governance of organizations. Are there minority representation in your clients? In your vendors' boards? Are they, promoting women? Through their organization? Is that a practice that they have codified in a policy? And what do they do in reality? Take a look at their board. Do they actually have minority participation? Do they have, female participation in their board? Third question that came in here during my presentation is about language across the supply chain. What best practice could you counsel for having different languages across the supply chain? Well, this is a great one, and I think most organizations are, operating on a global level, and when you operate on a global level, you typically operate, in English language. So from a headquarter perspective, you might be fine operating your TPRM program with, English language as, the language in the tool, the language in the reporting. But for third-party risk management, we are dealing with suppliers and vendors. And I can guarantee you that all of you are using, vendors in your specific countries and jurisdictions. Somewhere there are very valuable and high contributing vendors into your organization that are not comfortable in, having a conversation about their controls in English. So the outcome of that is going to be two. One is that they are embarrassed and they don't want to, admit that they have difficulties with your questions or your questionnaires you send over. So they respond them, but then you will get inaccurate responses because they don't understand. Or the other one is that they, simply don't respond at all because they don't understand, and you might need to spend a lot of time, with them to go through that. So I think there are two levels, in terms of, inserting language in a valuable way for TPRM. One is for your domain control questionnaires. When you reach out to your vendors, you absolutely need to be able to speak to your suppliers in their native language, to be able to get the good answers that you need for your program. And the second one is in terms of reporting, you now need to have reporting tools that can take all of these answers, provided in Korean, Japanese, English, Chinese, Indian, and then put them all together and then have them be reviewed in a transparent way in one common language. You do that in tools that have an easy capability to kind of switch between different languages. So it's actually in this space of third-party risk management, quite a bit of a challenge, to be able to manage that, to get the result that you want. The fourth question I have here is about some different risks and how you can use information. The question says, we have one vendor who just announced some redundancies due to inflationary and supply chain pressure. Is there any way to anticipate third parties who may be at risk? Well, so the way to do that, is kind of leverage, different tools. A lot of the different solutions, out in the marketplace today are providing, third-party data or insights, into cybersecurity, to sanctions, to financials. And a lot of organizations are using that when you assess a vendor in the first place. And I talked to that a little bit about during my assessment of the maturity chart of TPRM programs. The more mature organizations are then taking that next step to start anticipating by monitoring these, live third-party data sets. It becomes a part of your integrated policy and process. You keep looking at financial stability information every day. And if a data point, from Dun & Bradstreet or from, S&P Global is changing in a way that you are uncomfortable with, you will be alerted. Or you might even open up different workflow activities and start a process with your supplier to understand, what happened. That goes, of course, into other areas as well as, supply chain, geopolitical risks, cybersecurity, data risks, sanctions, and different news stories about mergers and acquisitions. So I think, going back to the person's question here, I really think, the ongoing monitoring of information that is available in the marketplace today, and, the scripted actions, of those monitoring, knowing what to do, when a trigger kicks in, is something that we really strongly recommend that you do. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Charles Bassner, to take a look at if we have any questions that have been submitted later in this presentation.
Hi, my name is Charles Bassner. I'm part of the Know Your Third Party, or KY3P organization. As Peter mentioned earlier, I've been a third-party risk management practitioner for over five years at a large financial institution. We do have a few additional questions that have come in, so I'll try and address those. The first question: how did the team come up with a percentage on which value activities to focus in regards to, I guess, the presentation? The team had tried to, I guess, whiteboard all of the activities that would be associated with the third-party risk management program. And then in looking at that holistic view, try and identify what are activities that are more focused on the administration or managing a process as opposed to managing risk. And the percentages were just splitting out what are things that would be value add activities that internal resources can focus on, such as managing risk, and then what are things that are the administrative activities that are low value and oftentimes very time consuming for staff. The next question, at what point stage does a company decide on a third-party framework to outsource? Um, uh, Currently in the marketplace, there are a number of solutions or offerings for an outsourced or managed service for third-party risk management. So organizations that vary in terms of size and program maturity can benefit from an outsourced service. For the small organizations that don't have the institutional knowledge or the capability to thoroughly administer a third-party risk management program, there are outsourced solutions that can provide end-to-end policies, procedures, technology, and professionals who are focused on third-party risk. And larger institutions that have an established program can also benefit from an outsourced service from, again, focusing on the low risk or administrative efforts that can be outsourced to TPRM professionals, and internal resources can benefit from focusing the majority of their time on managing risk. There's a question here: how do you ensure your internal resources are focused on critical risks? For a one-size approach should be avoided, isn't best, I guess. You want to consistently apply an inherent risk model that can differentiate between critical and high risk relationships from low risk or transactional relationships. Then administrative activities and oversight of low risk suppliers can be things that can be outsourced, and internal resources can focus on overseeing the critical and high risk relationships and strengthen those relationships with your critical and high risk suppliers. There's another question here about how can the due diligence process be optimized. So for the due diligence questionnaires and outreach, the scoping for those questionnaires should follow a risk-based approach. To try and shorten the response times from your third parties, you should try and reduce the number of questions associated with your outreach in a smart way. Meaning you don't want to have, if your program accounts for information security questions, but your third party is not going to have access to any sensitive firm or client data, those questions can be excluded from the outreach. Additionally, if you have multiple relationships with a particular vendor and you've already obtained information from other engagements, reducing the outreach by, if you already have the information for entity level questions, not going out a second or third time for each specific relationship. Then also the most mature third-party risk management programs are using external data partners to continuously monitor their third parties across various risk domains, including financial stability ratings, cybersecurity scores, location risk, and negative news monitoring. So that's how I guess the due diligence outreach can be optimized from the specific due diligence, and then complementing those assessments with the insights data to continuously monitor your third parties. And I don't see any other questions in the queue. Thank you very much for your time.